Hi. My mom's friend became my dad's stalker when she realized he was never going to leave my mom for her, but sanity had already left this crazy woman long ago. I'm a 22-year-old woman, and this whole situation started years ago, though I've only recently found out just how far things had actually gone. First, let me give you a bit of context about my family. My parents have been married for 28 years and have 4 children, me and my 3 younger brothers, who are 20, 17, and 16. My mom works as the principal of a high school, and my dad is a regional manager at a construction company. We're not rich, but we live comfortably. My dad earns a good salary and we live in a nice neighborhood. My mom loves posting pictures of our family vacations and milestones on social media. She's proud of what they've built together. My parents both look great for their age. Mom stays in shape, and dad still catches women's attention when we go out. He's tall, has salt and pepper hair, and works out regularly. People always comment on how young they both look. Now here's the problem: my mom's best friend, Sandra, who's 43. My mom met her about 6 years ago when Sandra moved to our town for a new job at the local community college. My mom used to teach English there. Sandra was going through a divorce and didn't know anyone, so my mom invited her to family barbecues and holiday parties. She felt sorry for her and wanted to help her adjust. From the start, something about Sandra felt off to me. At family gatherings, she barely spoke to me or my brothers. She never seemed interested in getting to know us, but she always found reasons to talk to my dad. Sandra started showing up at our house when my mom wasn't home, claiming she forgot mom was at work. She dressed differently when she came over: tighter clothes, more makeup. When mom was around, Sandra dressed normally. She also started asking me questions about dad's schedule, his hobbies, what kind of music he liked. She claimed she wanted to buy him a good birthday gift, but the questions were way too personal. Her weird behavior escalated about 3 years ago. Sandra started showing up at places where dad worked, saying she just happened to be passing by and saw his company truck. She brought him coffee and lunch. Sandra also became obsessed with our family photos on mom's Facebook. She commented on every photo where dad appeared. If mom posted a picture of all of us together, Sandra would comment something oddly specific just about dad. I work part-time at a local coffee shop, and Sandra comes in often. She always asks about my dad when she orders, wants to know if he's stressed at work, if he's happy at home, if mom treats him well. She frames it like she cares about our family, but it creeped me out. I started giving her short, vague answers. Last year, things got even weirder. Sandra started having car trouble every few weeks. But instead of calling a mechanic or roadside assistance, she called my dad. And he helped, because that's just the kind of man he is. These incidents always happened when mom was busy at work or out of town visiting her sister. Sandra would thank him by cooking elaborate meals and inviting our whole family over to her place. But she'd spend the entire evening focused on dad, asking for his opinion on everything, completely ignoring the rest of us. This school year, my mom has been working more hours due to budget cuts at the school. She stays late for meetings and weekend events. Sandra started taking advantage of that time. She began texting dad directly instead of going through mom, asking for help with her garden, moving furniture, or fixing things in her house. Dad helped, because that's who he is, but he started telling mom about it afterward. Then Sandra started dressing like my mom. She dyed her hair the same chestnut color, started wearing similar clothes and jewelry. When mom bought a new car, Sandra bought the same model, in a different color, the very next month. Last month, Sandra began taking loud phone calls while she was at the coffee shop. I couldn't help but overhear. She was talking about my dad. She mentioned him by name, described what he looked like, talked about his job. She said she'd been patient for years but was finally ready to take action. She said mom was always too busy and didn't appreciate what she had. She said dad deserved someone who would give him full attention. I thought about telling mom, but I needed more proof. So I started paying closer attention. I noticed Sandra had started parking near the construction sites where my dad works. She'd sit in her car and watch him. She began doing her grocery shopping at the same store my mom goes to, clearly hoping to accidentally bump into my dad. She even signed up for a membership at Dad's gym, even though she had never shown any interest in fitness before. 3 weeks ago, my friend Phoebe, who works at the community college, called me. She said she had something to tell me about Sandra. Apparently, Sandra had been using the college's computers to look up information about my dad. Then, last weekend, while Mom was away at a principal's conference and Dad was home with my brothers, I was at work. Sandra showed up at our house around dinner time. She brought a casserole and a bottle of wine. She told my dad she figured he might feel lonely with Mom gone and wanted to keep him company. My youngest brother texted me. He said Sandra was sitting way too close to Dad on the couch, touching his arm repeatedly while they talked. When I got home from work, Sandra was still there. She was in the kitchen, doing the dishes, acting like she lived there. She had put on one of Mom's aprons that hangs next to the sink. When she saw me, she took it off quickly. Dad was in the living room watching TV with my brothers. Sandra left shortly after I arrived. But not without first hugging my dad to say goodbye and telling him to call her if he needed anything while Mom was away. Yesterday, Phoebe called me with disturbing news. Sandra had used the college's computer to look up divorce attorneys in our area. She had also searched for information about Dad's income and property records. Phoebe told me that Sandra had been telling her coworkers she was in a relationship with a married man who was planning to leave his wife for her. She described the man in such detail that it was obviously my dad. Sandra had even been telling people at work that she was going to become the stepmother of 4 kids. I haven't told Mom or Dad about any of this yet, but I know I have to, because I'm scared. I'm worried about what Sandra might do next. I think she truly believes that Dad is interested in her, even though he clearly isn't. She's built a fantasy relationship in her head, and now she's trying to make it real. Update 1. I need to tell you what happened after my original post. I decided to talk to my dad. First, I waited until Mom was at work and my brothers were out of the house. I sat him down and told him I was concerned about Sandra's behavior. I explained everything I had noticed over the past few years and showed him the evidence I had collected. He admitted that Sandra had been messaging him more frequently in the past few weeks. She had been sending him good morning and good night texts, asking about his day, and sharing personal details about her life. Most of the time, he ignored her and didn't reply. He showed me the messages, and it was true. Mom knew about the situation too. Dad also told me about an incident that happened 2 weeks ago, one he hadn't told Mom about. Sandra had shown up at his workplace claiming her car wouldn't start and asked him to drive her home. During the ride, she started crying and said she felt alone. She told him she thought about him a lot, and that she felt he understood her better than anyone else. Dad said he felt trapped in the car and didn't know how to respond. When they got to her house, Sandra invited him in for coffee. He declined, but she grabbed his hand and told him she needed to show him something important. He pulled away and said he had to get back to work. Sandra got upset and replied coldly, saying she thought they had a special connection. Dad said that since then, he had been avoiding Sandra's calls, but she kept reaching out. She started showing up at our house when she knew Mom wasn't home. Dad had been making excuses not to open the door, but he couldn't avoid her forever. After hearing all this, I knew we had to tell Mom together. Dad agreed. We called Mom at work and asked her to come home for lunch. When she arrived, we sat her down and explained everything. Her reaction wasn't what I expected. She told us that Sandra had been asking her strange questions about their marriage lately, wanting to know if she and Dad were happy, if they argued, if Mom thought Dad was satisfied with his life. Mom thought Sandra was just being a concerned friend. The 3 of us decided that we needed to confront Sandra together. We didn't want to involve my brothers just yet, we hoped we could handle this quietly. We planned to meet with Sandra that weekend and make it clear that her behavior was inappropriate. But Sandra beat us to it. 2 days after our family conversation, she showed up at our house on a Thursday afternoon. Mom was at a school board meeting, and Dad was helping my middle brother with a science project. I was in my room when I heard the doorbell and went downstairs. Sandra was standing on the porch with a bottle of wine and a gift bag. She was more dressed up than usual. She asked if Mom was home, and I told her about the meeting. She smiled and said that was perfect, she wanted to talk privately with Dad. I let her in because I didn't know what else to do, but I stayed in the living room instead of going back upstairs. Sandra called for Dad, and when he came down, she handed him the wine and the bag. She said she wanted to celebrate their friendship and show her appreciation for everything he had done for her. Dad set the gifts aside without opening them. Sandra sat on the couch and patted the cushion next to her, motioning for him to sit. He chose a chair across the room. Sandra started talking about how grateful she was for his help and support. She said she'd been thinking about their friendship and realized it meant more to her than any relationship she'd ever had. She said she felt like Dad truly understood her and cared about her happiness. Dad tried to steer the conversation away. He mentioned that Mom would be home soon and suggested Sandra call her to arrange a better time to visit. Sandra said she didn't want to talk to Mom. Then she said something that made me step forward. She told Dad she knew he was unhappy in his marriage. That she could see Mom didn't appreciate him, that she was too busy with work to give him the attention he deserved. That after observing their relationship, she could tell Dad needed someone who would truly prioritize him. Dad stood up and told Sandra she was wrong about his marriage and that her comments were inappropriate. He told her Mom was the most important person in his life and that he was completely happy with their relationship. Sandra stood too and stepped closer to Dad. She said she didn't believe him. She said she'd seen the way he looked at her, how he responded to her attention. She claimed she knew he felt the same connection she did. Dad asked her to leave. Sandra's entire demeanor changed. She started crying and told him he was lying to himself. She said she had been patient for years, waiting for him to realize they were meant to be. She said she had done everything to prove how perfect they would be together. And then Sandra said something that chilled me to the bone. She said she knew he had always wanted another daughter, and that she could give him one. That they could start their own family. That he could finally have everything he ever wanted. Dad told Sandra to leave immediately, and that she was to stay away from our family. But Sandra refused to leave. She said she wasn't going anywhere until Dad admitted his feelings for her. I was recording the entire conversation on my phone. I had started recording when Sandra began talking about how Dad was unhappy in his marriage. I knew we might need proof of what she was saying. Dad called Mom and asked her to come home immediately. He told her there was an emergency involving Sandra. Mom said she would leave the meeting right away. We also called the police, though they ended up taking longer than Mom to arrive. While we waited for her, Sandra kept pleading with Dad. She said she had given up other relationships for him. That she had moved to our town specifically to be near him, after seeing his photo on Mom's social media. She said she had planned everything carefully and didn't understand why he was rejecting her. When Mom arrived about 20 minutes later, Sandra was still in our living room. She was sitting on the couch, crying, begging Dad to give her a chance. Dad was standing near the front door, clearly wishing she would just leave. Mom came in and immediately asked what was going on. Sandra looked up at her and told her she was sorry, but she couldn't keep pretending anymore. She said she was in love with Dad, and that she believed he felt the same way. Mom told Sandra to leave her house and never come back. Sandra started protesting, saying Mom didn't understand. That Dad had been unhappy for years, and he deserved someone who adored him the way she did. Mom grabbed Sandra's purse and the gifts she had brought, walked to the door, and threw them outside. She told her she had 10 seconds to leave or she'd call the police. I corrected her, we'd already called, and they were on their way. Sandra finally left, but not without shouting, "This isn't over." After she was gone, Mom locked the door and turned to face Dad and me. She asked me to play the recording I had made. We listened to it together, and Mom's face twisted with every word Sandra had said. When the police finally arrived that evening, she filed a report. They took it seriously, classifying it as a harassment case, possibly even stalking. Dad blocked Sandra's number and all her social media accounts. Mom did the same. We told my brothers everything that had happened. But I don't think this is over. Yesterday, I saw Sandra's car parked across the street from our house. An hour later, when I looked out the window again, it was gone. I'm worried about what she might do next. At this point, it's clear she doesn't have all her ducks in a row. Update 2. In the comments, we had already established that Sandra's level of insanity was Hurricane Category 5. There's a reason I picked that name as a replacement for her real one. The original just doesn't sound like a hurricane. A few days after Mom filed the police report, Sandra started calling her work phone. She called the school office repeatedly, demanding to speak with her. When the secretary told her that Mom wasn't available, Sandra claimed it was a family emergency. Eventually, the secretary told her that Mom had given explicit instructions not to accept any calls from her. So Sandra began showing up at Mom's school. She parked in the visitor lot and waited for Mom to come out. The first time this happened, Mom saw Sandra's car and called the police from inside the building. The responding officer told Sandra she needed to leave school property immediately. 2 days later, Sandra tried something else. She filed a formal complaint with the school district about Mom's work performance. In the complaint, Sandra claimed that Mom's personal issues were affecting her job. Mom's supervisor called her in for a meeting to discuss the complaint, and Mom explained the situation. She showed them copies of the police report and the recording I had made. Meanwhile, Sandra was still trying to reach Dad. She couldn't call or message him directly, he had blocked her, but she found other ways. She began calling Dad's office and leaving messages with his assistant, claiming to be a family friend with urgent news about an emergency. The assistant passed along the messages, but Dad never returned the calls. Sandra also began following Dad to his work sites. He would arrive at a construction project and see her car parked nearby. She'd sit in her car watching him work. When he told his team what was going on, they started taking pictures of Sandra's car and license plate as evidence. One morning, Sandra approached Dad while he was inspecting a job site. She acted like nothing had happened at our house. She told him she missed talking to him and wanted to apologize for any misunderstanding. Her excuse was that she had been emotional that night and didn't express herself clearly. Dad reminded her to stay away from him and our family. He told her she was the subject of a harassment complaint. Sandra started crying, saying she just wanted things to go back to how they used to be. My friend Phoebe called me with an update about Sandra's behavior at work. The college administration had begun noticing problems with her job performance. 2 weeks ago, she started leaving gifts at our house when we weren't home. We would come back to find flowers, cards, or food on the porch. The gifts were always addressed to Dad, with notes apologizing for the misunderstanding and begging for a second chance. One note said Sandra had started seeing a therapist who told her to fight for what she wanted. Another note said she realized she couldn't live without Dad and was willing to wait however long it took for him to change his mind. Mom called the police every time. But the officer said that leaving gifts wasn't technically illegal unless Sandra stepped onto our property to deliver them. Last week, Sandra showed up at my youngest brother's high school during his lunch break. She told the school office she was his aunt and needed to speak with him. The office called Mom to verify her identity before allowing him out of class. Mom immediately told them that Sandra was not family and was not authorized to have contact with any of her children. The school called the police and detained Sandra until officers arrived. She was arrested for attempting to contact a minor without permission at a school. She spent the night in jail and was released the next morning. The incident was reported to her employer, the college, and Sandra was suspended while they investigated her behavior. Eventually, she was fired. From what we've heard, she plans to move away and start over. But with this level of obsession, none of us believe she actually will. Update 3. Sandra didn't give up after losing her job. In fact, losing it gave her even more free time to go full-blown deranged. 3 days after we were granted a restraining order against her, which we absolutely needed, Sandra violated it. Mom was coming out of the grocery store when she saw Sandra sitting in her car in the parking lot. Mom immediately called the police and drove straight to the station instead of going home. Sandra followed her car. But she turned around the moment she realized where he was heading. The police arrested Sandra later that day at her apartment. She spent 3 days in jail for violating the restraining order. When she was released, the judge extended the order and warned her that any future violations would result in more jail time. Sandra's response? She hired a lawyer and tried to challenge the restraining order. She claimed we were the ones harassing her. Her attorney filed a motion saying Sandra was actually the victim. The court date was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Dad, Mom, and I had to testify about Sandra's behavior. There was also all the evidence we had collected. Sandra's testimony was disturbing. She claimed Dad had flirted with her and encouraged her attention. She said he had confided in her about his marriage and asked her for advice about his problems. She insisted Dad had invited her to family gatherings just to spend time with her. But the judge reviewed everything and denied Sandra's motion. He made the restraining order permanent. He also ordered Sandra to undergo a psychological evaluation. After that, Sandra took things even further. She posted our home address, Dad's workplace, and even photos she had secretly taken of our house and his job sites on social media. The police said her posts qualified as cyberstalking and harassment. They contacted her and warned her to take the posts down and stop mentioning our family online. At first, Sandra refused, claiming she had the right to share her truth. A week in jail changed her mind. Sandra was evicted from her apartment for not paying rent and causing disturbances in the building. Other tenants had complained that she was shouting on the phone at all hours and having emotional outbursts in the hallways. We thought maybe that would finally be the end, that Sandra would leave town after being evicted. But she didn't. Instead, she moved into a cheap motel about 20 kilometers from our house. She started driving past our home more and more frequently, sometimes several times a day. Our neighbors started recognizing her car and would call us whenever they saw her parked nearby. Then Sandra changed tactics. She began contacting Dad's clients and coworkers, saying she had important information about him. That's when the police arrested her again. This time, they requested that Sandra be held without bail until her trial. Oddly enough, they didn't find her at the motel. They caught her driving around the city, after she had been drinking. Sandra has now been in jail for 6 weeks awaiting trial. Her psychiatric evaluation determined that she suffers from a severe delusional disorder and requires long-term treatment. Her lawyer is negotiating a plea deal that includes mandatory psychiatric treatment and a reduced prison sentence. Last week, Sandra's sister contacted my mom. She said she was horrified by what Sandra had done and wanted to apologize on behalf of the family. They had known about Sandra's issues and had tried to get her help in the past. But after she moved away, they cut off contact, until now, when they heard about her trial. The prosecutor expects Sandra to be sentenced to at least 2 years in prison, along with mandatory psychiatric care and parole. She will also be legally prohibited from contacting our family for at least 10 years. Update 4. Sandra has been contained. I repeat, Sandra has been contained and neutralized. The judge sentenced her to 4 years in prison, where she will receive psychiatric treatment. She will be evaluated before her release and will likely continue mandatory therapy afterward. The restraining order will remain in place even if she shows signs of improvement. Technically, our family could petition to lift it, but at our last family dinner, it was pretty unanimous. No one wants that. The prison she's in is specialized. They send people with mental health issues there so that, in addition to being incarcerated, they also receive treatment and medication. Sandra's family supports the sentence. They believe she's finally getting the help she always needed, and always refused. It's crazy, though probably not the best word in this context, that this woman used to be a family friend. She came to our house regularly. She was close to us. And now, she's in prison.